Welcome back. Well, we get into our panel discussion where we get to back to one of our top stories where 194 members of parliament have voted in favour of adopting Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's contentious budget. 182 MPs were opposed. Now, the two largest members of the Government of National Unity, the ANC and DA, have clashed over a 0.5 percentage point hike in VAT. But for reaction to the budget vote, we're joined by UNISA Political Sciences Professor Dirk Kotze, Chartered Accountant Kaya Stoller. We're joined by Tax and Budget Policy Researcher Zimbali Mncube, as well as Equal Education Researcher Mahfouz Rafi. Gentlemen, a good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. There's so much to speak on. And of course, as we have this discussion, we're also readying ourselves to chat with the Finance Minister in the next 20 minutes. And so also, perhaps for the sake of the viewer, help us frame what it is that he needs to be saying to us at a time like this. And Professor Kotze, I think this is a great way for us to start with you. You've got, of course, this evening, the Democratic Alliance is sharing a media advisory saying that they are going to file court papers challenging the past VAT budget, as they've called it, in their very own statement, heading to the Western Cape High Court tomorrow morning. Was there an expectation at all where you were this morning that there could be a situation where we see the ANC and the Democratic Alliance finding each other, or were you at all surprised by the outcomes of this budget vote?
Yes, I would say it is slightly surprising. I would have thought that they would have come to some form of understanding before they would have gone to this point and this decision in Parliament. But it appears as if it has become such a principled point, not only for the DA, but quite a number of other political parties. And that is why we see that the result of the vote was actually so very close to each other. I think what has become very prominent about this is, though the percentage of the increase in the value-added tax looks very small, it has assumed a very strong symbolic value. It has become actually the focus of a budget which is trillions of rand, but it is about to what extent it reflects on a budget which is talking to the material conditions of many South Africans in general and the economic situation. So I think it has become, therefore, not about VAT as a tax anymore, but rather about it as symbolic of the economic situation for the people of South Africa. And I think this has become the dividing line, again in symbolic terms, because it's not a right-left type of division that exists. It is on both sides of both more conservative parties and parties from the left.
Yeah.
But it is a positioning in terms of how do you relate specifically to the ANC.
Yeah, very interesting. And Kaya, this is where we'll bring you in. Professor Kotze, they're talking about, there's two discussions here. There's, the issue of economic stability, then there's the politics. But if we look at the economic conversation, and certainly your concerns about what happens next when you do have a party that is key in the Government of National Unity saying they're heading to court to challenge this budget. For the very first time in our history, a budget is postponed when it is voted upon after finally being delivered. A GNU member saying that they're heading to court. Concerns that you have around stability moving forward, and certainly any points that you'd like to share around the quality of this budget as well.
Yeah, good evening. I don't know if it's concerns about the GNU, because one of the defining features of a coalition of this nature is that there was always going to be divergences, in particularly to key issues. And the point that was obviously highlighted last year is that what this GNU needed was a mechanism of resolving those issues before they become the type of public fallout that we've seen. Unfortunately, the president and those that are responsible for getting these things done just simply haven't got around to doing this. So that's what degenerated into this public fallout that you're seeing here. Now, what you need to also be able to figure out is whether the DA is simply not latching onto what is said to be a procedural flaw in relation to how the conversation was canvassed at a committee deliberation yesterday, and then ultimately how it was voted on today. Because if it's simply a matter of procedural flaw, you can simply just correct that, and you're probably still going to end up with the same question of, are you going to vote for this particular budget? But what it might do is that it might then buy them some particular time to say, look, for as long as this matter is pending before the courts, we're not going to make a call on whether we're exiting the GNU or not. So it could simply be that strategic point of saying that we just need to get some time in order to figure out whether our position within this particular alliance is tenable. But obviously now it has been passed, and for as long as it has been passed, we have to work around the question of how it gets implemented. And I don't think that they can reconcile their position of outright rejection, which is what they did today, versus remaining in the alliance that then has to implement this particular budget over the next 12 months. So it's a difficult position that they find themselves in.
Yeah. In fact, that's one of the points that has been made by the president in a leaked audio, and we're going to play that in a moment. But where the president, of course, talks about the cul-de-sac, he uses the words, that the Democratic Alliance finds itself in. Zimbali, you, of course, with the Institute for Economic Justice, you are a tax and budget policy researcher. You hear Kaya saying that, you know, could it be that the DA, we might see them latching on to a procedural flaw? I think that for most South Africans, what they want to know is VAT in or out. I mean, what you make of this, and if you believe that there could be a challenge in the weeks or months that follow over that 0.5 percentage point VAT hike.
Thanks, Naledi, and good evening to your viewers. I think we should still see what transpired today and in the previous weeks as a positive in terms of the budget process itself, even besides the VAT hike that is proposed in the fiscal framework, particularly because, you know, as civil society, we've been participating in public hearings through the parliamentary committees, and they have amounted to essentially a tick box exercise whereby the committee makes recommendations to the National Treasury, but they are not robustly engaged or even, you know, taken seriously. And so I think this year marked a slight departure. Obviously, because the ANC has lost the majority. And so we saw members of parliament really grappling with the issues on the table and taking up some alternatives. And so I think in that sense, we should see the current moment as progress in our democratic era, that for the first time, Parliament, you know, was robustly engaging in this process. In terms of the VAT hike itself, I think it's unfortunate that despite the public hearings, which saw submissions from ourselves and 23 other, and I think it's 23 orally and over 50 submissions that were made where we tabled alternative proposals to the VAT hike. And so those were not adopted by the committee in the fiscal framework, but they simply made a recommendation, which has been, you know, we question whether those recommendations in terms of that the committee says the National Treasury must go back 30 days to find other alternative avenues. I mean, we've made recommendations before to the National Treasury, so it's not clear that this recommendation holds any legislative power to force Treasury to implement other revenue measures, but which of course brings us to the question of the DA. And I think some legal advice has clearly stated that the powers that the minister has in terms of the VAT Act, particularly Section 7, and the related money bills, the provisions there, that seek to give the minister the power to, you know, upon announcing the tax changes that they take effect. It's something that I think the court will have to decide for us. But I think, yeah, we should also engage the DA's proposals because I don't think they give us any, you know, better alternative. Essentially, the DA has said no VAT hike, but cut expenditure, which is what the National Treasury has been doing since 2012. And it has admitted this year that this hasn't worked. And in fact, it has led to a higher debt to GDP ratio, and at the same time, it has contributed to the low growth path. So it's important that we read the DA's intervention and as, not just something to challenge the VAT hike, but what does it mean if it is challenged? Do they mean they are challenging it and then replacing it with more cuts, or are they proposing more progressive tax revenue measures, which we have put forward and the committee has had in Parliament?
There is, of course, the issue of, where this money essentially goes. And one of the things that we did see was some civil society organizations coming out in support of what the budget has put forward from an expenditure point of view, particularly for important sectors like education. Mahfouz, perhaps you could speak to us about, where an organization like Equal Education, for instance, is sitting with the budget that today saw 194 yeses in Parliament.
Look, the passing of the fiscal framework technically would sort of allow for somewhat of a binding constraint of the amount of money that the government will be spent. But there's the second part of the budget process around appropriations and division of revenue, which would direct where exactly this money is going. And what we know and what we've been saying for many years of austerity and budget cuts is that your key frontline services, healthcare, education, social protection, are in desperate needs of funds. South Africa has extreme inequality, extreme unemployment, obscene poverty. And so these are sectors that really need funds. In education, we were looking forward to increases, but it's still, I think, once you peel back the layers, you'll see that it won't make up for the more than decade of austerity measures that have been going on. Despite the minister setting herself a 31 March deadline, there are still pit latrines in school. And then when you look at inflation readjusted figures, but not only CPI inflation, just inflation in the basic education sector in particular, you'll actually notice that there's been dramatic decreases, including this year. And so the fiscal framework, I think it's good that the process is being is being open to challenge, that the extent of public participation is hopefully widening, and we call for further that, including before the budget process, budget is tabled. I think that would be very important in ensuring that expenditure is managed well and gets to the places that need it most, particularly given the social crisis that we face in our poorest communities.
Yeah, thanks for that. So this is what I want to get into, because as we look at what has come out with the passing of the budget, there also has been the negotiations between the political parties, particularly those inside the Government of National Unity, in the run-up towards the budget vote that we saw taking place today. And some audio certainly was leaked, and we've got that audio where we, of course, are hearing the voice of the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, alongside Deputy President Paul Mashadile. They're giving feedback to ANC members on interactions that he's had with GNU partner, the Democratic Alliance. Let's listen into just some of that leaked audio.
This evening, John Steenhuisen made contact with me and said, "Where do we go now?" And I said, "John, the ball is entirely in your court." And he asked, "Does the ANC say we should leave the GNU?" I said, "The ball is in your court. You have put yourself in this position. So you need to work your way out. You took a decision in the committee. That was the choice you made." And he tried to argue that the position that was adopted is no different from the position that they had put up in either cabinet or outside. And I said, the reason why the ANC, through our chief whip, embarked on a process of consulting all parties, as we did when we formed the GNU, was to show leadership. We are the ones, whether you like it or not, who are leading this GNU. And we therefore have a responsibility to demonstrate that leadership. Even under difficult circumstances or situations, we will continue to do so. And that is why our chief whip and the various comrades of his other colleagues embark on this process of consulting with all parties. And I said to him, you as a party, of course, of the GNU, you were singular in saying you will oppose this budget, and you added insult upon insult towards the ANC. And said, called the ANC all manner of names.
And of course, credit to Times Live also for supplying us with that leaked audio of the president's voice. But Professor Kotze, perhaps you help us out here. The president there heard saying, John, the ball is in your court. Now, what do you see happening next for government of national unity? Is it at this point hanging on to a thread? And if so, if we do see the Democratic Alliance stepping out of the government of national unity, cabinet decisions that then need to be made?
Yes, I think we are in quite a precarious situation at the moment because there's uncertainty about what is the future of the government of national unity. Many people believe that this is possibly the end of the government of national unity and that the DA has no other option but to leave it. I think it's not necessarily so simple because from the point of view of both parties, both the ANC and the DA, they are in a sense bound into a relationship where none of them have actually a choice but to be together, because the other choices that are possible for the ANC in terms of forming a government and not having a minority government, which is one of the options, is to either work together with the EFF or with MK, or to form a government of 8 others or 9 other very small parties. And I think what is going to be problematic is that at least 2 of the 3 options are also excluded by what happened today. And that is that both the MK party as well as the EFF also voted against the budget or the fiscal or the report of the committee that served today. So there are actually very few options open for the ANC to form an alternative type of government. The only 2 options, as I said, is either to have a type of a minority government, which is very unlikely and not at all advisable, or secondly, to have a party a collection of small parties, which are also not really advisable.
Yeah.
And so I think they are back to the drawing board, both parties, both the ANC and the DA, of how to be able to structure a new relationship. I tend to say that this, whether it was about the Bella Act, whether it's about the Expropriation Act, whether it's about international relations like in the Middle East or Ukraine, or now this, it is all very important building blocks in order to develop a relationship within the government of national unity. They didn't have that opportunity immediately after the election. There was simply not time in terms of the constitutional timelines. And these issues are now forcing them in order to develop some or other form of relationship.
Right.
Because the one thing which very few people take into account is that, let's say for argument's sake, that the DA can't continue in the government of national unity. What's going to happen with the provincial government in KwaZulu-Natal? If they pull out of that also, it means that MK becomes the government in a coalition there. And that is, I think, what the ANC wants to avoid at all costs.
Yeah.
So it's not such a simple equation of simply, looking at the government of national unity and taking a decision on the basis of what happened today.
Yeah. So, I mean, lots of, I suppose, trickle-down effects of what would happen if we do see the collapse of the Government of National Unity. Unfortunately, I am out of time, but Kaya, I want to squeeze one last one in with you and say, okay, we're moments away from hearing, of course, from the Finance Minister himself for joining us here on the show. And I'm keen to hear from you if you feel that there are certain red flags that at this very time would be concerning for the Finance Minister.
Yes, inevitably there are, because obviously this budget has had to go through a couple of iterations just for it to be passed. And even those that supported it have expressed particular reservations about the processes and some of the proposals there. So for the Finance Minister, the job unfortunately does not end today, because even if it has been passed, he has to go through a process of then ensuring that if he tries to pass a budget next year, he doesn't have to go through the same processes. So it's whether you put together new alliances or whether you address some of the pressing concerns that have been expressed by those that voted for the budget today. There's definitely going to be a lot more work, and we assume it's going to be a lot more transparent work compared to what has been the case before, because part of the reason we ended up here is because the processes tend to be so vague and so opaque. People discovered at the very last minute that there was a 2% on the table, and that's essentially created the crisis. So that's definitely not a crisis you want to repeat.
Yeah, lots to talk about, guys. But unfortunately, all the time we have. Thank you so much for speaking to us. We do appreciate it. Mahfouz Rafi there, head researcher at Equal Education, speaking to us. Professor Dirk Kotze, political science professor at UNISA. Kaya Stole as well. There was an accountant. And Zimbali Mngube, who is a tax and budget policy researcher with the Institute for Economic Justice.